This is TLC to go.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. And, today we are zeroing in on something I think is super relevant to you all as health sciences faculty. And that is how to kind of navigate your classroom during, tumultuous times. And to help us unpack this whole thing, we're diving deep today into a resource from the UTHSE Teaching and Learning Center called Teaching in Tumultuous Times. So what we really want to do today is pull out some of those practical strategies and actionable advice that you can use to help support not just your students, but also yourselves, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about this resource is that it kind of acknowledges the elephant in the room. And, what I mean by that is these significant events that are happening outside the classroom, and those can have an impact on everything that's going on inside the classroom.
Right. I mean, you can't really expect everything to be business as usual when you've got a global pandemic happening or when there are these social and political events unfolding that directly relate to healthcare and well-being. Like, ignoring all of that is kind of impossible, right?
Exactly. And what this resource does is it actually highlights the research that shows that acknowledging these events, even just briefly, can have a positive impact on student learning and well-being. I mean, think about it. If you were a student who's trying to focus on anatomy while also worrying about, healthcare disparities affecting your community, wouldn't it be nice to know that your professor kind of recognizes those anxieties?
Oh, 100%. It's like, that moment when you realize you're not the only one who's like feeling completely overwhelmed by it all. Just by acknowledging that there's all of this stress can make the classroom feel like a much safer space to actually learn. And this resource also talks a lot about faculty self-care, which I think is so important because they say you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Right. Yeah, that's so true. And the source actually recommends that faculty find some support systems. And these can be through colleagues, mentors, professional organizations even. And also just being open with students when it's appropriate, not oversharing or anything, but just modeling those healthy coping mechanisms. And that can actually be really beneficial.
Yeah, totally. So now that we've talked about how important it is to acknowledge these tumultuous times, let's maybe shift gears a bit and talk about the practical tips that this resource gives us for how to facilitate classroom discussions around some of these challenging topics. And it really highlights three key strategies: preparation, inclusivity, and then avoiding what it calls deficit model teaching.
Yes, and I think preparation is a fantastic place to start. Especially when we're talking about health sciences, where, the subject matter can get really sensitive. Before you jump into a discussion that could potentially be difficult, faculty should really take some time to think about what a safe space looks like for their specific classroom. Like, how are you going to phrase those discussion prompts? What format are you going to use? And how are you going to handle those disagreements that might pop up?
Okay, so it's like setting the stage in a really thoughtful way. One thing I found interesting was that the resource suggests using rounds as a discussion strategy. Can you maybe talk about how that works?
Yeah. So rounds basically give every student a chance to share their opinion, even if that opinion is pass. And this can be super helpful for students who maybe need a little bit more time to process all the information, or for those who might feel a bit intimidated speaking up in a large group. It's a way to create a more structured environment for sharing while also respecting all those different communication styles.
Oh, that's a really great point. And it seems extra relevant for health sciences, right? Where students might be dealing with personal experiences or strong beliefs that are directly related to health and illness. So it's kind of a way to honor those experiences while still, maintaining respect and facilitating that dialogue.
Right. And if rounds don't really work for your teaching style or for a specific topic, the resource also mentions using written reflection prompts as a good alternative. So this allows for a bit more introspective processing, which can be really helpful for, complex ethical dilemmas or those sensitive patient cases that you often talk about in health sciences.
That makes a lot of sense. Not every student is going to be comfortable speaking up in a group setting, especially when you're talking about material that can be really emotionally charged. So it's great to have different tools in your teaching toolkit, right? Speaking of which, the second key strategy the resource talks about for facilitating these conversations is inclusivity. So how does that apply to health sciences specifically?
Well, inclusivity is all about creating an environment where all students feel seen, heard, and respected, no matter what their background or beliefs are. And in health sciences, this is so important because, think about the diverse patient populations that students will be serving one day. So it's about fostering cultural humility and recognizing that social determinants of health have a huge impact on people's individual experiences.
Right. I can definitely see how that ties into avoiding deficit model teaching, which
Yeah.
was that third strategy mentioned.
Hmm.
So it's not just about acknowledging that these difficulties exist, but also about presenting a more balanced perspective,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. You see, deficit model teaching tends to focus only on the problems and hardships, and that can be really disempowering. Instead, we want to highlight resilience, agency, and all those positive actions that people are taking to actually address health challenges. So, for example, if you're talking about health disparities, you would definitely acknowledge the systemic issues that are at play, but you'd also want to showcase those community-led initiatives or those public health interventions that are actually making a difference.
Wow, that's such a powerful way to shift your perspective. It's about empowering those future healthcare providers to be a part of the solution, not just overwhelmed by all the problems they're seeing.
Exactly. And that actually leads us into another super important point, which is connecting students with resources and support. We have to remember that health sciences students are often dealing with some pretty demanding coursework, those clinical experiences, and just the emotional weight of patient care.
Right. It's like they're juggling all these different worlds, academia, healthcare, and then their personal lives, all while trying to navigate these crazy times. I mean, they definitely need support systems in place if they're going to thrive. So what kinds of resources does this guide actually recommend?
Well, it mentions quite a few, and I think it's helpful to think of them as like a toolkit for different needs. So, for those situations where you need immediate crisis support, hotlines are absolutely crucial. Then, if a student's having trouble with food insecurity, knowing about local food banks can make a world of difference. And of course, you've got counseling centers that provide ongoing mental health support, and that can be essential for managing all that stress, burnout, and those emotional challenges that come with healthcare.
Yeah, and it's not about expecting faculty to become therapists or social workers, but more about knowing where to direct students when those needs come up. And it's also about normalizing help-seeking behavior in general. Right.
100%. We want to create a culture where asking for help is seen as a strength, as a sign of self-awareness, not as a weakness. And speaking of support, the resource highlights this really interesting UTHSC webinar called Saying the Right Thing: How to Prepare Learners for Difficult Conversations in Clinical and Classroom Settings.
Oh, that sounds super useful, especially for, health sciences faculty. We're constantly having to navigate those sensitive conversations around diagnoses, prognosis, and end-of-life care. What exactly does this webinar offer?
Well, from what I understand, it gives some really practical guidance on how to approach those tricky discussions with empathy, clarity, and cultural sensitivity. And it also emphasizes the importance of self-reflection and recognizing our own biases because those can really affect how we communicate with students and, of course, with patients.
This entire resource is like a gold mine of valuable advice. We've gone from acknowledging that elephant in the room to exploring strategies for facilitating those tough conversations to connecting students with those essential resources. But what I think is so powerful is this underlying message of resilience for both faculty and students.
I totally agree with you. It's about recognizing that the challenges are there, but not letting them completely overwhelm us. It's about finding ways to support each other and our students while still engaging in that meaningful learning and ultimately working towards a healthier future for everyone.
And as we're wrapping up our deep dive into teaching in tumultuous times, the source encourages us to, keep exploring. And it gives us some additional resources from institutions like Smith College, Carnegie Mellon, and Ohio State.
Mhm.
And it's a good reminder that we're not alone in all of this. Educators across, all different disciplines are dealing with these same challenges.
And I think it's so fascinating that this, this collective sharing of resources and strategies, it's a form of resilience in itself, right? It's about creating that network of support and acknowledging that we can all learn from each other's experiences.
So before we wrap things up completely, I want to leave you with this thought. How can you adapt these core ideas, acknowledging the times we're in, facilitating those sensitive discussions, and connecting students with the resources they need? How can you adapt all of that to fit the specific needs of your students and your own unique teaching style?
I think that's the real challenge, right? Because teaching, especially in health sciences, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. It really takes a lot of adaptability, empathy, and just a genuine willingness to meet your students where they are at that moment.
It's like acknowledging that your classroom isn't some island that's completely cut off from everything happening in the world. And your students, they're not just, empty vessels waiting to be filled with knowledge. They're actual people who are dealing with all these complexities, carrying their own experiences and anxieties with them.
And what's so interesting about health sciences is that those lived experiences often, directly connect with the subject matter in really profound ways. Just imagine teaching about mental health while a student is secretly struggling with their own mental health issues, or talking about infectious diseases in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, those connections can be such powerful learning opportunities,
Hmm.
but they also require like a huge level of sensitivity and awareness from the instructor.
Yeah.
It's about finding that balance between, academic rigor and compassion, between knowledge and empathy.
Exactly. And that's where the true art of teaching comes in. It's about creating an environment where students feel safe enough to explore those tough topics, to question assumptions, and to connect their own personal experiences with what they're learning in the classroom.
It's about understanding that teaching in times like these isn't just about going through the motions and delivering content. It's about fostering resilience, encouraging critical thinking, and building a sense of shared humanity with your students. You're equipping those future healthcare professionals with the tools and the mindset they need to navigate a world that's always changing.
And if we think about the bigger picture here, it's really about empowering those future healthcare providers to approach their patients not just as, cases or diagnoses, but as real people who are shaped by their social, emotional, and cultural backgrounds.
Which brings us back to why we started this whole deep dive in the first place. Teaching in tumultuous times, it's not just a resource, it's like a call to action for all of us in health sciences education. It reminds us that our role goes way beyond just transmitting knowledge. It's about supporting the well-being and development of the whole student.
And maybe most importantly, it encourages us to look inward and reflect on our own teaching practices and ask ourselves, how can we best support our students and, ourselves as well as we all try to navigate these really complex and constantly changing times?
So there you have it. We've completed our deep dive into teaching in tumultuous times from the UTHSC Teaching and Learning Center. We've uncovered some really powerful strategies for supporting health sciences students and, of course, ourselves as faculty. And remember, you are not alone on this journey. There are tons of resources out there, and by working together, fostering open dialogue and really prioritizing empathy, we can create a much more supportive and resilient learning environment for absolutely everyone.